Hello and thanks for watching. My name is Paul Cleary, Ecosystem Architect at Venafi. In part one of this three-part series, we looked at some of the problems that application and security teams face when trying to deploy enterprise apps at scale. Things like certificate-based outages and the lack of scalability when working with manual processes. And then we saw how Venafi and F5 can help solve those problems together. In part two, we saw a demonstration of the process an F5 administrator would go through to deploy a new application using a new machine identity provided by Venafi. In this final part three, we're going to explore a new scenario, one in which an application already exists and is being hosted by BigIP. Together, we'll go through the process required to bring that application along with its machine identity under management of BigIQ and Venafi. Let's get started. In the previous videos, we learned that the CSR will either be created by Venafi or by BigIQ, depending on the settings of the policy folder. The same holds true in this example. The difference is we have an existing folder structure for the application that has already been deployed using the Venafi BigIP integration. Under the main certificates folder, we have a folder called Web Servers, which contains our existing application attached to a virtual server on BigIP. We also have a folder called BigIQ, where any net new machine identities will be created. I'll explain a little more about this in just a minute. The next thing that we'll look at is our current BigIP configuration. If I go to BigIP local traffic menu and take a look at my virtual servers, you'll see that I have an existing application on my virtual server. It is at the 192.168.2.10 address. And I have that pulled up as well, and so you can see I have an actual application here. It is being hosted by BigIP, and if I view the certificate here, it is for existingapp.venafidemo.com. So the first thing that we need to do to get started is head over to the BigIQ management interface, because BigIP hasn't been added as a device under management of this BigIQ yet. So we'll go to Device menu and click Add Device. I'm going to type in the IP address of my BigIP. And just make sure the password is correct. And click Add. And this is going to reach out and search for any services that may be enabled on that BigIP device. In my example, I only have the local traffic management service enabled, but in production environments, you could select really any of these that you have enabled on your BigIP, and the rest of the video will be the same. So what this is doing right now is, again, discovering those services, importing. Well, it's not yet importing. We'll import in the next step, but it's discovering all of those services that are available, any of the profiles that may have been set up previously. And so the next thing that we need to do is go and complete the import of those settings. So we'll say import. The next thing that we need to do is go to the configuration menu, and we're going to set up Venafi as a third-party CA management provider. So I'll go to local traffic, certificate management, third-party CA management, and click create. And you'll notice here that Venafi is actually the only third-party CA provider listed. So I'll go ahead and click Venafi. We will call this TPP, and we want to fill in our API endpoint, and then provide the credentials for the TPP server. Okay, and we'll test that connection. Everything looks good, so we can save that and close. Next, we need to edit the policy. And what this does is sets the top-level policy folder that BigIQ will have access to on Venafi. In this example, we're going to set it to Policy Certificates. Okay, and click Get. This configuration allows new application certificates to be created in the BigIQ folder structure, while existing application certificates will be renewed wherever they exist currently, keeping objects in the Venafi interface consistent with what administrators expect. So let's take a look at the existing certificates and keys. At this point, we have an existing application that BigIQ knows about, but the certificate lifecycle is still being managed by Venafi. Now that BigIQ is actually managing this application, and therefore the associated machine identity lifecycle, we have to make sure TPP doesn't try to push the certificate directly when it gets renewed. In this example, I'm simply going to change the web server's management type from provisioning to enrollment. This will allow Venafi to process the CSR with the configured certificate authority, and then BigIQ will poll TPP to retrieve the certificate when that request has been fulfilled. Next, I'll head back to BigIQ and select Import from the Certificates and Keys page. I want to choose Import from CA Providers as my import type, and specify a strong password that will be used to secure the private keys during the import process. Okay, and then select Import. And in just a second, what's going to happen is BigIQ is reaching out to Venafi and pulling in the certificate information and private key information and storing that on BigIQ now, because it's, again, going to manage the certificate lifecycle of this machine identity going forward. If we take a look at the expiration date, we can see that this is a fairly new certificate, so administrators may not need to renew this just yet. But for this example, I'm going to pretend that the date is sometime soon, and this certificate needs to be renewed now. And so in order to do that, if we remember, since BigIQ is doing the management of the certificate lifecycle, the F5 administrators are able to renew the certificate directly from this interface. So to do that, I'm going to click the certificate name, and we're presented with a Renew Certificate button in the top right here. So I'll click that. We don't have the option to change the policy folder. The certificate is going to be renewed in the folder that it exists in already, but you do have the option to renew some of the metadata about that certificate. So if you're changing the host name or any SANs, want to change the contact email, things like that. We do have to specify a new private key. We can use the same one if we'd like that we used before, or any new one that meets the password requirements. And again, this is for securing the private key when it's transported back to BigIQ from Venafi. Okay, so we'll click Renew. And we should see some messages come through at the top here. It will give an error that says the certificate and private key don't match. That's normal because it's going through the renewal process. You also saw that certificate alert pop up saying that a new certificate is available from Venafi. And so now the expiration date hasn't changed, but the time has been updated. So this is a new certificate at this point. However, it's still, nothing has changed on the end application because this change hasn't yet been pushed down to BigIP. And so in order to do that, what we need to do is go to our virtual servers, and we need to basically redeploy this application. So I'll select my existing app and click deploy. And we'll call this renewed cert. Okay, and select my existing application as my source object, find relevant devices, and select BigIP as my target, and click create to create this evaluation. And again, what an evaluation is a list of changes that BigIQ notices in the existing BigIP configuration and the configuration that you're trying to push down. And so what it's doing is creating a difference log that allows you to look at those differences one last time and verify that they're correct. And so you can see really the certificate and key are the only things that have changed at this point. Still using the same SSL profile that was in place and imported, really only changing that certificate and key. Okay. And so once that's done and we're satisfied with the changes, we can scroll down to the bottom, click deploy now, and you also have the option to schedule this for later, maybe during a maintenance window. Click deploy now and deploy. And our deployment is complete. In this video, we saw how Venafi can be configured as a third-party CA manager for BigIQ, and walked through the migration of an existing application that was already using Venafi and BigIP, but is now being managed by BigIQ. This allows for immediate access to new machine identities whenever they may be necessary directly through the BigIQ interface by F5 administrators, while still providing the security or PKI team and Venafi admins the policy control and visibility they require. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video series.